I'm the chair of the session 2 in this afternoon. So in the morning, we had a session on CBAM and the carbon pricing of the big design for the carbon neutrality. But in reality, we have a transition to the green economy. So that's the theme of the session 2. And as mentioned by John Louis, we have Dr. Yonezawa in this session in the afternoon. So we have 6 speakers from this order, in this order. So the first speaker, I would like to invite my colleague, Professor Elena Shadorina, Waseda University. She has a PhD in economics, and she's been working on the political economy of carbon neutral policy and energy policy in Japan and Asia. And she and I and Dr. Klump, Professor Klump, were at Paris for 1 year in the same international housing. So the floor is yours now, Elena.
All right, thank you. Toshi, you didn't mention time?
From 12 to 14 minutes.
All right. Yeah, please let me know.
I'll give it to you here.
All right. Okay. Oh, it's already. Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the second session, and I have the honor to open this session. And indeed, as title suggests, it's about transition to the green economy. Originally, I was doing research on energy transition of Central Asian countries, several countries which I would speak briefly about in a while. But again, as Toshi mentioned, last year we had this very fortunate meeting, and we teamed up for some workshop. And back then, I started looking at the topic which I'm presenting today, which is about their developed nations, such as Japan and the European Union countries, attempt to promote, to assist, to help developing nations, developing economies, emerging economies in their energy transition. Because we were originally given very tight time constraint, so I will not be speaking in much detail, but I'll try to outline the ideas which I am working on. So that's an outline of the talk which I'm going to follow. I'm not mentioning energy transition diplomacy or strategy for energy transition enhancement, meaning that all this will be related to Japan and the European Union. So just for the matter of keeping it shorter. So providing the background and giving the context for this strategy for energy transition enhancement, I think I'm already very much helped by the speakers in their morning session, because there is no need to explain a lot of contextual specifics. So as was today mentioned directly and indirectly, the European Union and Japan, they face a lot of constraints and challenges when it comes to energy, because previously established systems stopped functioning efficiently enough, a result of many things. For instance, for the European Union, it would be a kind of self-decided change in the pattern of energy consumption and the pattern of energy policy as such. And at the same time, both Japan and the European Union faced with the unexpected geopolitical circumstances, such as their war, invasion of Russia, of Ukraine, and that have changed dramatically their situation for the European Union in terms of energy supply, and for all nations importing energy and dependent on various materials, including critical raw materials. That has set a quite different setting. So both the European Union and Japan, being price takers in the global energy markets and not producing enough low carbon technologies and not deploying them quickly and massively enough, they actually have this necessity to implement changes in their own national energy transition policies, and also find the ways to cooperate, including cooperating among them, EU and Japan, and cooperation in the third countries which I'm specifically going to speak about, Central Asian countries. The energy transition is understood not only as a change of socio-technical regime which is employed in their energy systems, but broadly speaking, it's assessed, it's seen, it's being understood as their way to very dramatically change their economic and industrial structure and social structure of the economies we are looking at. So energy transition is seen as a driver for clean, innovative, competitive industry, and also it's seen as a driver for socioeconomic justice and inclusiveness. These are their buzzwords which are very often communicated by the European Union, and some of its context is shared by Japan as well. So the Central Asian region consists of 5 countries. It's very interesting because when this topic is presented about energy transition in this region, some people in the audience may be caught surprised, because out of 5 we see that they are hydrocarbon-rich nations such as Kazakhstan and Turkmenistan. They are hydrocarbon-poor nations, but very rich in water resources, and therefore still quite sufficient in terms of power generations, Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan. And the 5th nation belonging to this region, Uzbekistan, which is having substantial deposits of oil and gas, those conventional energy resources, but because the economy is actually quite large, the most populated economy in Central Asia, approaching 20 million people, and very rapidly growing. So the context is such that still this country also made very clear targets to strengthen energy transition and become more reliant on renewable energy. So we see that energy transition indeed has started in the region. Surprisingly, yet I have some work done on this topic, trying to explain why this kind of phenomenon we see that hydrocarbon-rich nations seem to be more promoting renewable energy, while hydrocarbon-poor nations are less advancing this policy and implementation effort. In order to kind of understand why the hydrocarbon-rich nations are pursuing this agenda of energy transition, there are plenty of insights from the literature which would explain this interest from the perspective that we are looking at Central Asian countries. We are actually dealing with non-democratic, sometimes clearly authoritarian regimes, and like some nations in the Middle East, these countries are pursuing energy transition as one of their ways to prove their openness to their international community, for their cooperation and so on, especially because, as we have seen today, that decarbonization becomes a very important component of international cooperation. So these nations understand very well that without pursuing this agenda, they would be left without any trade, investment, and things like that. But also we can see that there are purely political economic aspects in it, because authoritarian nations said that they are actually quite successful in setting the goals and achieving certain goals, because they have much stronger tools and instruments which they can impose on their economic agents, and that is one of their so-called advantages of this system compared to democratic societies, when people may oppose some of the measures, policy decisions, and so on. Theoretical framework is yet not so well established, but looking at this topic, I started by attempting to identify these important elements for the analysis, which would be policy formulation or policy outputs, policy implementation, policy outcomes, and set of theoretical platforms, backgrounds seem to be quite helpful, because we are having formulated the topic as the EU, Japan, and Central Asian countries. We need to understand that their domestic context is very different, and in order to come up with some kind of meaningful analytical approaches, we employ a variety of these theoretical frameworks. Such, for instance, as one of the strands of the literature helpful are varieties of capitalism, which would specifically identify among many such form of capitalism as a coordinated market mechanism, where we would find out a lot of state role played, and even if not the state itself, then there would be a very significant role for the state-owned companies. And so state-owned companies, for instance, in the case of energy transition, are very well engaged in Central Asia, but at the same time, we see that they are given obviously some kind of administrative and other privileges, but at the same time, they are requested to fulfill substantial social contracts, and that's why we often see that they are not acting as pure market agents here. Other things which are very important to pay attention to is, for instance, path dependency. And I mentioned in the opening that they are energy resource-rich countries, but we see that there is even kind of broader framework to understand path dependency, because we are speaking of established energy systems where, for instance, hydropower sector dominates, but at the same time, in the context of Central Asian countries, it's not so sustainable because they are dependent on glaciers, and glaciers are melting, and Central Asian countries are actually characterized as one of the most severely affected by the global warming. So we see that there is a question of sustainability in that sense. Putting things together, the main point of my talk is that the European Union and Japan has this strategy for energy transition enhancement. That their terms and notion, which I developed based on their illustration, which I put roughly on the slide. A nation has obviously energy transition strategy, then domestic set of ideas, concepts, and so on and so forth. When operating externally, the nation follows a certain energy transition diplomacy. Then when this diplomacy is being applied to the context of the third country, we are speaking of a strategy of energy transition enhancement. The ways how their developer of this energy transition strategy is able to communicate their ideas and implement and establish the cooperation with the third countries.
Can you wrap up in a minute?
Yes, I see that I have like 2 minutes, all right, left. These kind of explanations about Japan's energy transition strategy were, I think, provided by Toshi, roughly, that indeed Japan has become really serious about it, and there are increasing range of efforts to decarbonize. We need to, speaking of diplomacy, Japan has very clear focus on Asian countries, but not Central Asian, but Southeast Asian countries, and has recently improved or enhanced its ambition to become a kind of normative power. Similarly to what we have discussed earlier about CBAM, Japan also has now a certain power in that sense, specifically in the way how the aspect of quality infrastructure was promoted. And if you see in blue marks, Partnership for Energy Infrastructure was established as one of their very effective tools for Japan to set certain norms for that. In the groups J7, APEC, and J20, quality infrastructure became one of the components which are being already endorsed and being applied. Then 2023, Resilient and Inclusive Supply Chain Enhancement Initiative for International Supply Chain Risk Management. This is also what Japan is credited for in terms of norm settings, and here we see that the global context has proved that necessary. Oh, yes? All right, it's unbelievable when you start speaking. Okay. If 1 minute.
1 minute, okay.
All right. So I think we have heard about the European Union efforts, and the audience is very well informed on that, right? So let me now just go very quickly to this comparison in terms of national strategies for energy transition and diplomacy. We see that both are seeing energy transition more than just like specifically energy thing, but it's industrial revival and economic growth. We see that both countries are seeing their necessity to strengthen the security aspects of energy transition, specifically critical raw materials. And in that sense, their agreements and the partnerships are always implying this component. And we see that the European Union moved forward from CBAM and deforestation law, which already affects their third partners, right? There is now a newer trend discussion following the Draghi report that it will be clean trade and investment partnerships, which would make further impacts on the third countries, including Central Asian nations, where we would find that their differences between Japan and the European Union are noticeable, but the important thing is that the two countries are sharing technological preferences. They are already cooperating in their Green Alliance, which sets their very good context for the two nations cooperating in the third countries, such as Central Asian countries. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So now I would like to move to next presentation by Professor Shigeru Matsumoto, a professor of economics from Aoyama Gakuin University in Tokyo. But he is currently visiting scholar at Barcelona.
University Autónoma de Barcelona.
So Autónoma from the Barcelona. And he has received a PhD in economics from North Carolina State University, and he and I went to the same master program several years ago. Since then, we've been working a lot together.
Thanks for the introduction. My name is Matsumoto. Given the time constraints, let me first summarize my presentations. What I want to say is that energy conservation in the household sector is very sluggish compared to the other sectors. That's the first point. And the second point is, that developed countries, all of us are facing the population aging. The population aging makes further difficult, further energy conservation more difficult. Third, in optimistic scenarios, I think it's very difficult to achieve the energy conservation target in household sectors. The fourth is that we need to focus on, we need to target households which will be severely affected by the carbon pricing. That's all I want to say. That's all. So, that's all. So from now on, I just wanted to present some stats. Okay. Since I have a colleague, very close colleague in Spain, we working together for last 5 years, and this figure show that how much time we allocated to each to specific activities. So do you know? We know that how much time per day we have 24 hours. In per years, how many hours we can use? We have to calculate, multiply 365 days. So in total, we have 8,760 hours. So from that, about 80% of times is allocated at household activities. Although we think that we are spending lots of time, we are very seriously working at the office. Indeed, we only spend 15 hours if we consider the whole society views, because there are lots of dependencies. You have children and some retired people. We have to take sleeping times and cozy time at house. So we spend huge amount of time for at home, but we don't know so much about how we allocate, how we spend at home time at the house. So probably due to these reasons, the progress in energy conservation at household sector is very, very sluggish. Indeed, this left figure illustrates the change in the proportion of the final energies and the natural gas consumption by sector worldwide, based on the data from IEAs. These figures show that the proportion of energy consumption in the household sector has increased over the last 50 years. You know that clean skimmings. It's easier to tackle the energy consumption in the industry sector. So we observed a huge improvement in energy consumption in the industry sectors. But household sector is very difficult because you cannot use a command and control approach. Nobody wants that. We need the privacies. We want to be independent. So on the right-hand side, right picture shows that the change in the proportion of final energy consumption by sector in recent years based on the data from Japanese government. This figure also indicates an increase in the proportion of energy consumption in the household sector over the last 30 years. So it's very, very sluggish and energy consumption in the household sector. Despite this, many countries have set ambitious targets for the energy conservation in the household sectors. In the case of Japan, as they said, their target is from 2013 to 2030, 66% reduction. I think it's really, really questionable. So let me skip this. So we have to know that the determinant of household energy consumption, if we wanted to, seriously working on energy conservation in household sectors. Of course, many scholars studied this issue. These are the issues treated in previous literatures. Okay. That although the economists often focus on income and price elasticities, but many other factors affect energy consumption, and it's very important. One of the important factors is the scale of economies of scale. So the family members can share the energy services. So not so many households has 2 or 3 multiple refrigerators at the house. We only have 1 refrigerator. Since we have sharing these rooms, we can reduce the energy consumption of space heatings. So economies of scale is really, really important. So we have to know that how the economies of scale works in the household sectors. And this table compares annual energy use by household size. By following the figure from the top to the bottom of the tables, you can see that as household size increases, energy consumption and CO2 emissions increases, but the per capita amounts decrease. Also, this figure is of Hokkaido areas from northern areas in Japan. And what I wanted to say in this figure is that the choice of heating system is really important. When we talk about global warmings, we concerned about the summer times, but in reality, especially in the household sectors, energy consumption is winter time is much more important. And Europe, it must be really, really serious. And in Japan, there are many, several variety of heating systems are used. So you see that from top, we use kerosene or electricity and gases, LP gas and city gas. And the choice of the heating system affects energy consumption. And in all days in Japan, especially in northern areas, they pretty much rely on the kerosene systems. The kerosene is not good for the, in terms of global energy conservations. So indeed, it's the best thing because Japan is still using coal for electricity generations. So gas is most effective. But the switching energy system is very costly. When you build the houses, you also choose heating systems. Once you establish the houses, it's very costly to change the systems. Retrofitting is very costly. So what I want to say is that once you decide to choose a heating system, you will be locked in the systems. It's virtually impossible for senior persons to change the heating system. So previously, I worked with Professor Arimura, and in his research project, I calculated carbon tax payment for each household, typical household. Then in this table, what I want to say is there is a considerable variation in the carbon tax burdens across the household, across regions. So naturally, the tax burden in northern areas is more expensive compared to the southern regions. I'm from Spain now, so I see that people are, last week I saw that the people are jogging with short sleeves. It's here, so it's pretty cold for free now. Very cold now. So it's Japan also. If you go to Hokkaido areas, the amount is roughly 2 times. And the size of the house was very different. According to the size of the household, the tax burden is also very different. And also, one more thing, that age of the household is also very important. Remember your childhood, you are wearing short sleeves, and if you're playing outside, your grandparents say that you better wear more clothes, you get the cold. So this is biologically they are fine. They feel cold temperatures. as you're getting old, you started to prefer the warmer weathers. So this is it shows that the future projection of the population aging, the population declines between the Eastern Asian countries and Europe's. So what I want to say that in these big figures, we are going to aging pretty much. So the trend is very similar. One of the reasons I'm studying at the Spain, because almost the trends is parallels. South Asia, South Europe and Japan will probably face similar situations. So in the case of a population aging, I'm doing 1 minute. We have to concern that three effects. The first is we call the pure aging. I already explained. As we're getting old, we prefer the warmer temperatures. Second one is a cohort effect. Generally, the younger generation knows better access to the better technologies, and they are more energy saving. And the last one is we have to concerned about the family structure effect. As population aging, the size of the household is shrinking. So it used to be that the typical household size is 3 or 4 used to be the house, but it's in the near futures, single household is going to be could be majority. So that's lose the scale of economies in energy conservations. So using the Japanese data, I estimated these three effects. This is a population age effect. As you see that as a population is getting old, we consume more energy. This is a cohort effect. You see that younger generations tend to be better. The last one is, this one is family structure effect. Because of the population, the size of the families is going to decline, we're gonna lose energy conservation benefit. As I expected, I think it's I face a time shortage. So this is I already mentioned that summary of my conclusion. Let me conclude my presentation. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much. It was a great idea that you showed us conclusion at the beginning of your presentation. Now we have the Dr. Yonezawa from OECD as the third speaker, so that's the change from the program. Dr. Yonezawa is actually currently at OECD, but when I invited him, he was working at Statistics Norway. And so today his presentation looking at the household in Norway. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for the introduction. And yes, so now I'm a senior economist at the OECD and in the environment directorate. And well, I started like last month. So yeah, this is basically the work which I was working like for my previous job, which is Statistics Norway. So this is a joint work with Taran Fang. She's a researcher at Statistics Norway. And let me start with introduction. So I think common story about like a climate policy that is basically like it's bad or worse for like low-income households rather than like the high-income household. And basically like the story is like climate policy. Oh, sorry. Yeah, I'm not used to this. Yeah. Okay. So the climate policies in general. So we put like extra cost and so extra price. So basically gasoline, diesel becomes more expensive, or coal becomes more expensive. And still like in the many parts of the world, electricity is generated by fossil fuels like coal and natural gas. So electricity also becomes more expensive. And then like the low-income households tend to have like a larger expenditure share of that gasoline, diesel, and electricity. So that's why climate policies are harming more for low-income households than high-income. Harming more for the low-income household than high-income household. However, the economics literature, so that's only for the expenditure side effect, and climate policies also affect the income side effect. So that's basically like that will like the negative impact on the wage or like a capital income and the what did I write? And like those emission intensive sectors tend to be more capital intensive than labor intensive. So for example, we can think of like the fossil fuel gas extractions or the production or steel production or those are like energy intensive sectors. They are more capital intensive than like service industry. That's more like labor intensive. So that's why like the climate policies generally it affects more on capital than wage. Then higher income household, they have larger income source share of capital rather than wage. Or like a low income household, they have like a larger share of like a government transfer income. So with that, basically like at least on this income side effects, climate policies are more affecting the higher income households than low income households. So basically like this expenditure side effects and the income side effects, so they are counteracting. And so basically like economics theory doesn't give the answer, which dominates. And one way to examine this further is using economic simulation models. And basically my expertise lies in these economic simulation models. So,
Just mute. Oh, it was okay.
Sorry. No, it's okay. Well, let's see. And one more thing I wanted to say in the introduction is like so when we think of like policies, that's not necessarily climate policies, but that can be like the two types. One is domestic policy, and the other is foreign policies. And for the case of Norway, also for these foreign policies, it can be split for the EU policies and non-EU policies like Japan or US and so on. And that's because like the EU and Norway are closely linked in many aspects. And with the new US president-elect, whatever he says, so we may have a problem like international trade in the near future. However, global international trade is still like a very important part of our current like global economy. And with that, basically foreign climate policies also affects my own country, wherever you live. So yes. So for example, for the case of Norway, now EU has a quite like a stringent climate policies. So the demand of fossil fuels go down, and then naturally like from the Norwegian export of crude oil and gas to EU is going to be smaller, and that's like the negative impact on the Norwegian economy. And so that's a direct trade impact. And the other one is like an indirect trade impact. So that's, for example, like the hypothetically, Japan somehow like the increase the stringency of the climate policies so much, and then they reduce like the demand of the crude oil. Then from Norway to Japan, at least as far as I know, I don't think so much like a direct export of crude oil to Japan. Nevertheless, crude oil, that price is basically set in the global crude oil market. So the crude oil price goes down, then that will be bad for the Norwegian economy. So it doesn't have to be like a direct bilateral trade link basically. So that's the indirect effect I mean here. Then okay, so research question. Okay. So research question in image, and so I use the ChatGPT and I put some keywords, and so this is what I come up with. So on the left-hand side, so that's a Norway, Norwegian, and on the right-hand side, that's the EU, and we can see like a solar panels. So as you can imagine, like the Spain, Portugal, Italy, they have so much more sunshine than Norway. And then we can see, I think, nuclear plant like that facility on the right top. Then for the wind, I think we can see both. For Norway, 90% of electricity is generated by the hydro, but 10% or so it's a wind. And we see that I think I'm loud enough. So this is, I think, like the oil and gas facility still. And I think these tankers are like, within Norway, they have been reducing so much like carbon emissions in Norway. Nevertheless, they still like export oil and gas. And I think this is like for tanker for that. I don't know ChatGPT to what extent like they capture the maybe CCS story. Then maybe like this is also for the maybe CCS. But anyway, yeah. I think yeah. Okay, whatever. So research question was, so basically like I think of like a Norwegian climate policy and the EU and the rest of the world, and how do they affect the Norwegian households, especially the low-income versus high-income households. Then in this paper, when I think of like climate policies, I basically like use the NDC target for the 2030. Then methodological-wise, we use the global economic simulation model. It's called SNOW, where statistics Norway's or the world model. So yeah, I was leading that modeling group until last month. So yes, yeah, okay, okay, and so it's based on the academic paper. So of course, like in that aspect, I mean, it's important to point out what's new in the literature, blah blah blah. But with a limited time, I just skip. But yeah, there is of course something new in the literature. That's yeah, but no time. Yeah, and also here, I don't say too much because of the limited time, and also like I don't probably no point to talk really about the technical things. So let me just say that this is static global economic simulation model, which is rather standard, I would say. Then the data which we use is also quite standard global data for this type of model. Except one thing, which is like we manually modify the Norwegian data. This is so often the case like global data, and if we look at like one specific country and tax rate, it's not so good quality and so on. So if it's important in the policy, I mean the research question, we have to check it and we have to modify it, and that's what I did. And I don't want to go into the details, but my point is we check the really important data for our simulation. We check it, and if necessary, we modify it. So, okay. Then right, and this global data, basically like they don't have any like the household details data. What I mean by that is like they just think of like one representative household of each country. So we supplement the household data of Norway, and here for the INC 1 is like the low-income household, or lowest income household, and INC 10 is the highest income household. And here I show the basically income source share. So in a very big picture, we can think of like 4 types of income source, and wage or labor income, and the capital income, and the resource. So that's basically for the case of Norway. That is like the natural resource of like oil and gas. So oil and gas basically income. Then the government transfer. And as I said, the low-income household, they have larger share of the income coming from like, government transfer. And for the case of Norway, it's quite like equal society. So labor income is quite like the not very different among the household, which is not the case for many developed countries or many other countries. And the capital income, yeah, that's clearly like the high-income households, they own them. You can imagine like the company stock share or index fund. Naturally, that basically high-income households, they own much more than that. So, I mean, more than the low-income households. And yes, for the case of Norway, that the non-small share of the crude oil and natural gas sector's income goes to actually Norwegian government, and we take care of that. Yeah, okay, we take care of that, yeah. Then simulation, and so BMK, so benchmarks of the 2030 economy, we basically create based on the real data. Then so we often call it like kind of business as usual. Yeah, thanks. And then the ROW, so that's the rest of the world. So non-EU, non-Norwegian economy, non-Norwegian, non-EU and not the Norwegian climate policies, only like Japan, US, and China and so on, like those climate policies. Then I add the EU climate policy on top of it. Then lastly, I add the Norwegian climate policies. So we can see the difference. So here is the results. And so basically here I show the income impact. So negative income impact for 10 different household groups differentiated by the income level. So INC 1 is the lowest income household, and INC 10 is the highest. And we can start with like the green line. So basically like the impact of the non-EU climate policies to Norway, that's not much. It's slightly going down towards the end. That means like a bit larger negative impact for the high income households, but anyway, not much. Then the next one is the black line. So we add EU climate policy on top of it, and that's the impact on Norway. And now we can see clearly like going down towards the end. So that means like the negative impact on high income household, that's larger than the low income households. And lastly, we add the Norwegian climate policies, and basically this trend doesn't change. So for the Norwegian climate policy, that's basically like neither progressive or regressive. What I mean by that is like basically the negative impact is proportional to the different income household. By the way, this is a percentage change. So if you think of like absolute impact in terms of like a euro or Norwegian krone or whatever, that's so much larger for the high income household, of course. So, and yes, I think the last one is that. But I think only one thing what I say is like this is because like the EU climate policy is much more stringent in terms of like that NDC target. That's why like it's like this, and so the yes, and that basically hits like a Norwegian crude oil and natural gas industry, and that share is mostly owned by high income households. Although some parties are government, and we take care of that, general trend didn't change too much. I mean, it was actually before taking care of it, it was even more clear. But once we take care of it, it was a bit, yeah. But nevertheless, still like this is a trend. And I think I finished that. Sorry, I went over the time. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much for very energetic presentations. So now I would like to invite Professor Estelle Cantillon. She's a professor of economics here at the ULB and a member of the Royal Academy of Arts and Society Sciences at Belgium, and PhD from Harvard University. She's been working on carbon markets and the transitions, and floor is yours.
Thank you very much. So this is a preliminary work that I'm doing with Mattia Nardotto, who's a colleague at ULB, and it's on the transition potential of Belgium to a green economy. And so I think the motivation is very simple. It doesn't need much time here, given this audience. We know that the transition is going to reshape the comparative advantage of firms, regions, and nations. Why? Because there's going to be a change in the price of energy that's going to, of course, impact positively and negatively, impact negatively those energy-intensive sectors, positively the other ones. There's going to create new business lines and new markets for recycling, waste management, and so on. And so the question that arises here is, to what extent will countries be able to take advantage of that transition? That's really what motivated us. And actually, even more precisely, what motivated us is this picture that comes from the Green Transition Navigator. That's an initiative by the LSE, Monash University, as a number of other universities. I'm going to first describe this graph, and I'll tell you a little bit more how these indexes constructed. Here, what you see is this is over time from 1999 to 2022. And it's the green complexity index. If you are high, it's good. If you're low, it's bad. Okay. What we've mapped here is Belgium with 3 neighboring countries, France, the Netherlands, and Germany. Germany is very high, first, number 1 on the green complexity index over all of this period. France is pretty high too, by the way. Japan is more or less at the same level if you do it. And what you see, and this is actually what the starting point of this paper is, that you see Belgium, which is the green lines, going down. The green complexity index and the green complexity position of Belgium is going down. So we were interested in trying to understand what does that mean in terms of its ability to move forward and to go over the transition. So I'm going to now exactly explain to you what is this green complexity index. It's based on trade data. And so what you do is at the country and product level, okay, there are three ingredients to this. The first thing that you can do, it's based on trade. Basically, it's trade. You can actually compute the revealed comparative advantage of a nation in a product. So if the export value of that country for that product represented a higher percentage of the trade of trade than the other countries. Okay, so it could be that typically when we say that Portugal has a revealed competitive advantage in wine, that's what we would teach our undergraduates. Okay, that's the first element. A second element is that we can measure the product complexity index. Okay, so that's a product level, and a product is complex if it's connected. So it's both. There's very few nations that have an advantage in that product, so very few nations can produce this product, and it's also highly interconnected to the rest of the economy. Okay, I'm going to spare you the formula, but this is actually the idea that it's trying to capture. And so with these two ingredients, you can build this green complexity index of a product, of a nation. So a green complexity index of country C is just the sum of the product complexity of the products for which that country has a competitive advantage. Okay, and so when it goes down, what we saw, it was in our case it was going. It's the rank of so it's we were ranking nations. Okay. And so the research questions we have are twofold. First is, and that's going to be the focus in this presentation, is just what explains the relative decline in Belgium's green complexity index. Okay, so I'll get there, so I don't need to summarize the next bullet points. And the next question is, are the changes that we see driven by firm or sector dynamics? And why is it important? Because if you think about industrial policy during the transition, you have the question of whether you should be investing in ecosystems, for example, education, market, talent for the green transition, or you want to invest in firms because it's in firms that the capabilities lie. So it's really the question that we are trying to get at. Okay, I won't be able to answer this question, but I'll tell you the kind of data we have to answer it. In terms of positioning within the literature, I'm going to be very brief, but essentially there are three strands of the literature. One is on the economic linkages, within economies. Typically it goes either through supply chains, and here it's more different. It's a separate trend of the literature. It's based on capability, so it's on complexity theory. There's all of the literature on how do industries transform themselves? You can talk about path dependence, supply chain interdependencies, the role of innovation, transition risk, and then it goes all the way to green industrial policy, basically. Okay, so there's a few things we know. That we knew a few things from the literature. We know that green products tend to be more complex than others, and that innovation in clean technologies typically involve more spillover. So it's something attractive about these green products. Second thing we know is that there are distortions in incentives for the transition. Typically it's about policy uncertainty. And the third thing we know about Belgium in particular, it's been already documented that Belgium has had a declining position in terms of patenting activities in climate change and climate mitigation technologies. There have been there's some papers that have been written on showing that the Belgian banks are reluctant to lend to innovators of disruptive environmental technologies in Belgium. And then the last thing is that there is an environmental goods and services sector is actually small in Belgium, but growing faster than the rest of the economy. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to show you is just trying to understand why the Green Complexity Index of Belgium is declining. I'm going just to decompose this Green Complexity Index over time, so from the beginning of the period, 2000 to 2020, and see what's driving what. So the bar in the blue is the Green Complexity Index in 2000. The blue bar at the end is in what happens in 2020. And you see this is a waterfall graph that shows that I'm decomposing this in terms of the number of products for which Belgium is gaining a competitive, the number of green complex products for which Belgium is gaining a competitive advantage. Then the second orange bar is the one where it loses competitive advantage, and the green is simply like the stocks where Belgium had a competitive advantage both at the beginning and at the end, but it's just the complexity of those products have gone down or up just because the linkages are changing. Okay, and so what you get from this is that it's mostly about changes in the products. There are products for which Belgium has lost positions, some for which it's gained. Fortunately, it's lost more positions than gained, but it's not really about the change of the complexity of these products. Okay, that's the first thing you do. Now what we want to do, so this is just based on trade data, and we got access, but it's too recent, so that's why I can't see you the results, is that we got access to micro firm level data from the National Bank of Belgium. So we have essentially for most of the big, the Prodcom company. So it's a big sample, it's representing about 95% of the production in Belgium. We know at the firm level which product they produce, which value, and so on. We have also, we're using the green product classifications that's coming from the OECD mostly, and that is used in the Green Navigator project. And we're also in the middle of collecting data on membership of these firms to industrial clusters. So that's the kind of industrial policy that we have in Belgium and their commitment under the Science Based Target Initiative. And so the question here that we'll be asking is, within each product category, what distinguishes a firm that perform well from the others? Okay, so, but most interestingly, that's really why having firm level data is really important. Because I told you, what I'm really interested in is to figure out whether it's about firms that are some firms that are really better able to produce innovative green products, or is it about the ecosystems and the infrastructure of the product, whatever, that is actually more conducive. And for that, here I'll be able to know whether it's actually there are some firms that really specialize in green products and they do all of them, or whether it's a bunch of firms each producing different products. Okay, and that's the kind of data we have. We'll be able to tease out whether it's about the ecosystem versus the firm level, and the goal being is to inform industrial policy, because the current policies in Belgium at the regional level is about these clusters. So there are clusters about waste management, circular economy, whatever, innovative chemistry, and so on. And so I guess there are relying on all of these strands of the literature on the competitiveness of nation that comes from the Michael Porter and others, thinking that this is all about capabilities of the ecosystem rather than firms, and the fact that we have firm level data would be allowing us to do this. So given that we had only 12 minutes, I stop here. I've got a bunch of stuff, but I think it's best to stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You made it on time. Well, then I would like to invite Mr. Copenhall from the Chief Executive of European Cement Association. So far we have heard about transition from academics. And now we have a perspective from the industries. So Mr. Copenhall represents cement industry's perspective.
Okay.
From
Good
your
afternoon, and thank you for inviting me here. Yes, you will hear a few slides about a cement-specific perspective, but not necessarily only cement-specific. I think Europe has a lot of heavy industries, energy-intensive industries. Cement is one of them. We are aware of the carbon footprint we have, especially in the upstream activities. I mean, manufacturing cement, and I think it's a small word about that. The first product we have is a clinker manufacturing, and the clinker manufacturing is the most CO2 intensive part of the cement manufacturing process. Most of our cement, so clinker cement, and then basically goes into concrete, and concrete is used to build everything around you. Of course, there is also timber, there is also steel, there is glass, there are other building materials, but we firmly believe that the built environment of tomorrow will need all these materials going forward. And that's why I think as an industry we also take our responsibility in reducing these embedded emissions in our production process. I'm going to give you a little bit of flavor of what we stand for, what our organization is all about, what we do. We have issued our roadmap update in May of this year, looking at how do we look at the ambition for 2030, 40 and 50. But I will also linger, and that will be the last slide, but actually that will be the slide I will focus on most, as I said in my summary, on the policy conditions, or what do we need to make sure that we can go ahead and do the efforts that we take now. Small word, we are representing indeed 29 members across the European Union, mostly cement associations, but of course the companies are in these associations, and they are at the same time also represented in our board, so we talk to the larger companies most of the time in our day-to-day business. I'm just coming from a meeting with the members, which is gathering all these company members. As I said, we have updated our carbon neutrality roadmap. We had a roadmap in 2020. We felt that the number of projects in the cement industry put forward have been strong over the past 4 years, strong enough to say, where do we stand compared to 2020, and can we even reinforce and strengthen our ambition compared to 2020? And that was indeed the case. We have at the same time also seized the opportunity to identify the policy levers that we need to work forward. As already said, I mentioned clinker, but actually what we're looking at in our decarbonization efforts is that we look at our full value chain, which means that we don't stop at the factory gate of cement manufacturing. We look at what can we do in each of what we call each of the 5 C's of our value chain. So the first one is the clinker production, as I said, most CO2 intensive. So there we look at what can we do there to reduce our emissions. Then we look at cement, of course. We look at concrete, but we don't stop there, because to be honest, in concrete you're talking about 10 to 15% of cement. The rest is water and aggregates. So concrete in itself is already a much lower carbon product than the cement and then the clinker. If you then look at the use of concrete in buildings, we like to say that the use of concrete also has CO2 benefits in a building in terms of, for instance, thermal mass, which allows you to keep the building at a specific temperature, which needs less recourse to, for instance, air conditioning or heating. So I think that's an element that needs to be taken into account in our assessment. So we like to look at that full value chain approach, including the last C, which we call carbonation, where basically concrete and the paste in the cement paste in the concrete can recarbonate or carbonate again at the end of the process, which means taking up CO2. We have estimated that to be 23% more or less of the process emissions of our industry. Process emissions is about 2/3 of our total emissions. So 23% of that at the end of a building can basically taken up again. So that CO2 as a carbon sink and the mineralization of CO2 in the construction material is an element that we want to take into account. Where are we? And I think that's a number of issues that we're looking at. For instance, we are having kilns, and that is the ovens that basically produce the clinker. They are operating at temperatures of 1600 degrees, 1700 degrees, very high temperatures. We use petcoke oil as fossil fuels, but actually that has been gradually replaced by what we call alternative fuels, taken from a variety of waste streams. So we talked about waste incinerators, but actually we can also produce and use waste in our kilns in replacement of the fossil fuels. We use industrial waste, we use household waste. That is basically used also biomass that is used in the production process, where we basically reduce our footprint when it comes to recourse to fossil fuels. We are at the moment in Europe on average at a 57% alternative fuel use. That is coming from 2% in 1990 to now 57%, and actually there are plants that are operating at 95% or even 100%. It's not a matter of technology, it's a matter of access to waste. It's a matter of making sure that the taxes on waste are going in the right direction. So it's more about the regulatory environment that needs to be in place, because when I'm saying it's 100% for some plants, it's plants that are in countries where such a favorable regime exists. Clinker substitution, yes, as I said, the clinker production is the most CO2 intensive part. So of course we're looking at how can we replace clinker in the cement production, and that is indeed looking at a rate by 2050 of 60%. We're now at 76%. That might not seem too ambitious, but the constraining factor we have is availability of the raw material, the substituting materials. We're looking at fly ash, we're looking at blast furnace slag, coming from the power sector, respectively the steel sector. They both decarbonize. We're going to have less of these materials, but we're looking at calcined clay, we're looking at pozzolans, we're looking at increased limestone that we can use in our production. But again, looking at what is the impact on the end product, on the safety of the building, what is the availability. We're going to need 66 million tons of these alternative materials by 2050 if we want to reach the 60%. Currently, we have 33 million tons, so that's a doubling of that amount in a declining market for fly ash and blast furnace slag. We have put 2040 objectives, and then we have quantified that and also looked at an external assessment. This is the slide which basically sets out our latest ambition. I'm just going to say 2 words about this, in the sense that the improvement compared to our previous roadmap is that we now say that we aim to be net zero over cement by 2050. And that is a change compared to the previous roadmap, where we talked about net zero over the value chain, which means including concrete, including construction, including carbonation. We now saying cement 2050, we're going to be net zero, which allows us to then think about carbon negative in the value chain, going down the value chain. It's a challenge, but I think again it's a possibility that we're looking at. The green part of that slide is actually carbon capture and storage. And I think that's where I wanted to come to. We cannot decarbonize unless we do carbon capture and storage. It's an essential element in our technology drivers. It's true that we look at reducing our clinker content in cement, alternative fuels, as I said before. All these are essential levers. But the big part of our reduction will need to come from carbon capture and storage. That is unavoidable going forward. And we do have, at this moment, 12 or 13 projects that are coming on stream in Europe. By 2030, we foresee that we will have 14 million tons of CO2 stored, 14 million tons captured. 12 million tons of that is going to be stored, and 2 million tons of that is going to be used for a variety of applications. Just as a side note, we're going to use or need between 250 and 420 million tons of CO2 for a variety of applications in Europe. For chemical products, for aviation fuels, sustainable aviation fuels. We're going to need it for building materials. The Commission is saying we're going to get there by biogenic CO2 and direct air capture. Now, if you know how much energy we need for direct air capture, if you know that the biogenic is mostly going to be stored as well, and we made estimations that's going to bring us about 79 million tons, from there to 250, 420, you will need industrial CO2 sources, at least for a transitional period. So I think that's an important element in the whole use discussion. I will end with this slide, but actually it's my most important slide, because there we say, okay, we can do all of this, But when we have the projects, we want to make sure that we have the right investment environment and the right environment in which we can do the investments. Carbon border adjustment mechanism, and I'm sorry, I mean, from the Japanese side, you might be a little bit worried about the initiative, but actually what we aim for is to make sure, what the European Union aims for, is to make sure that we're working on a level playing field. This is not about protecting the European industry, just making sure that you're operating under conditions that are equal to the conditions we live on. We have to pay a CO2 price for our emissions. The CO2 price now is pretty low, but actually the same burden needs to be put on third country operators. It's not about protecting ourselves, because if you have an operation and an installation in a third country which is operating at levels that are better than ours, you don't pay. Fair enough. That's not the issue. It's about creating the environment in Europe in which we can do our investments. Ramping up the financial support for our investments, you know that we're going to pay in the next coming years from now till 2034. Under the ETS system, we have made calculations. We might pay between 80 and 100 billion euros into the system. We basically say part of that money can come back to a specific fund to decarbonize the sector. For the moment, it goes to a variety of objectives. 75% of these funds are going to the member states. We have no clue where it is going to. 25% is going to the European Union. Innovation Fund, very useful. We had a number of projects financed on the Innovation Fund, but the demand for the Innovation Fund is 6 times much as what is available under the Innovation Fund. When we're talking about access to affordable decarbonized energy, we're going to have between 3 and 5 times more electricity demand than we currently have when we decarbonize, because of carbon capture operations. When we go to use, it's even more. So I think the electricity demand will be very, very high, and that will be true for all the energy-intensive sectors. The infrastructure we need, I mean, when we do CO2 capture, we need to make sure that the pipelines are there, that the storage sites are there, that there is a de-risking of that full value chain. Who is going to take the risk along the value chain for the investments? To give you the example, I have a storage site and the cement plant says, yeah, okay, you need to open the storage site. That storage operator is saying, yeah, but guarantee me that you're going to give me so much emissions. The cement plant is saying, not sure, because it depends on my production. So that whole de-risking needs to happen all along. And I think also continued access to our raw materials. We have 200 plants spread across the European Union. They are located close to the raw materials, which is limestone. So the limestone quarries are close to our plants, which means that we are, in the European philosophy, a very local industry. It's not like the steel industry depending on iron ore coming from Latin America. I mean, we are self-sufficient when it comes to our raw materials. But we need that infrastructure, both energy infrastructure, CCS infrastructure. Bad news for everybody in the room, including myself. I mean, energy infrastructure, we're going to pay a lot for the networks. Networks will need to be renewed, renovated, brought up to speed. If you think about reducing your energy bill, yes, maybe, but not on the infrastructure, which is going to bring it back up to a higher level. So I think we're going to see very high electricity prices going forward, which is not only affecting the industry, but also citizens. And then the last point I would like to mention, I will end with that, we don't decarbonize our sector for the sake of decarbonizing our manufacturing operations. We are making sure that when we do that, we bring low carbon products to market. And there needs to be an uptake on the market of these low-carbon products. And that is a whole discussion about what is the role of public procurement, how can we make sure that these products are taken up in the market. And again, will the final customer be prepared to take a premium, to pay a premium for a low-carbon product? If that is the case, and if we can design a system that allows that, then basically part of the decarbonization can be priced into the final customer. And that's a discussion we need to have. How much can you combine the upfront financing with the downstream financing and making sure that we jointly also finance the decarbonization? On that last point, maybe a footnote. We have calculated it, but the steel sector has done the same. The cost of the material in the end price of a building is minimal. It's below 5%. I mean, and that's the same for a car. The cost of the material in a car is minimal. If you increase that price, you increase the price by a car, but not in a proportion which is very high. That's something that we need to take into account. Of course, there's a whole range of issues around it. Who is going to take that price increase down the value chain? That's a discussion we need to have. But I think as a starting point, these are points that we need to take into account. So these are the challenges we face. These are huge financial investments. Only capture for our industry for one plant, a 1 million ton plant, capture installation, and it's a very wide bracket that we have in our roadmap. It's between 200 and 500 million euros, depending on the technology. For the carbon price that is now at 65, 68, we don't have a business case for these type of investments, but we're doing them. We're doing them also asking for public funding specifically for that reason. And that is only CapEx. When you're talking about OpEx, electricity costs and all the operational costs, in many cases, you're doubling these amounts. So these are very heavy investments, not to talk about the energy, not to talk about the infrastructure, pipelines and storage sites. So this is a very heavy agenda, and that was also reflected, I think, in the Draghi report when he talks about 700 or 800 billion euros a year to bring Europe back on track. Sorry to say, but that is 1,600 euros per citizen in Europe. And these are staggering amounts. When I'm looking at the loan we have after COVID, we have to pay it by 2057. That's 700 billion euros. That every year is putting a lot of strain on the European budget and the national budgets when they also need to spend on defense and other challenges. So I want to end with that hopeful note.
Thank you very much. Very concise and insightful presentation. So last, not but the least, I would like to invite Mr. Naohide Hua from Toyota Motor Europe. He's nicely was considering to bringing Toyota Mirai to the campus, but because of the condition on the campus, he couldn't bring Mirai. Well, as you know that I have shown the picture of Mirai from Paris this morning to the audience. Yeah, we have. Okay, so the floor is yours. But I guess some problem, technical.
Okay. Let me start my presentation. Today I couldn't bring the Mirai, but I bring the small poster, 2 posters for introduce the Mirai technology. So please take a look at the coffee break after my last presentation. Please wait for a moment. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm very happy to join here. I'm Naohide Hua. I'm Vice President of R&D at Toyota Motor Europe. I live in Brussels, near the Wallway Park Musée de Tram. I love waffle. Every weekend I ate. Firstly, I would like to inform quickly who we are. Our operation started in 1963 in Europe. We sold more than 1 million vehicles in 2023 last year, and market share was around 7%. Now we are in second position in European passenger car market, following the Volkswagen. And our sales ratio of electrified vehicle in Western Europe is already 75% today. So we are going to electrify continuously. Our philosophy is mobility for all. We don't want to leave anyone behind in the pursuit of sustainable mobility. Toyota is committed to providing practical and sustainable mobility solutions, which are tailored to each customer's specific situation across various countries and regions. Customers have different needs. Depends on where they are living, what type of climate, what kind of energy source are available, and what kind of income they have, etc. Even in Europe, the environment is very different between South area as Greece and also North area, Norway. Let us look at the global electricity supply situations. This is NASA's night map of the world and showing the renewable energy ratio of the major countries. Many dark areas you can see, except developed countries such as Europe, North America, and Japan. This means that there is a large variation of power supply in the world. Electricity is not enough to reach all the people on the planet. Also, available of renewable energy is still quite low in many areas. That's why Toyota is developing a wide range of powertrain technologies, from battery electric car, also fuel cell, plug-in hybrid, and hybrid technologies. We believe that there are many ways to reduce carbon emission and achieve carbon neutrality for all people on the Earth. So let's go to the detail from now on. This figure shows a vehicle life flow. Vehicle consists of the huge number of parts and materials. And if you drive a car, of course, you need fuel. Even for BEV, you need to charge electricity. And finally, vehicle life is ended at a long usage. In this every steps, CO2 is generated. Therefore, we need to consider not only CO2 reduction in the vehicle operations, but also in vehicle production, transportation, fuel production, and vehicle end-of-life treatment. In comparing the total CO2 amount between BEV and HEV in China and EU. In case of China, hybrid is better than battery vehicle, because battery manufacturing produce much CO2. And in case of China, does not have a much renewable electricity. And even in EU, BEV CO2 value is currently only 30% reduction from hybrid vehicles. This is a reality. Next is a material for battery. I want to talk. Battery is mandatory for electrification, but it is causing a kind of social subject such as international trading and securing of fair work conditions such as child labor. Also, amount of future potential resources looks limited. That is a very important concern for sustainability society. We need using it carefully and efficiently nowadays. But battery electric vehicles use huge amount of battery materials. One battery BEV use about of the same amount of battery materials as 6 plug-in hybrid or 90 full hybrid vehicles. So using same amount of battery cell, 90 of 100% non-electric vehicle can be replaced with hybrid vehicles. As a result, the average of the fleet is 205 kilogram is a very lowest value compared to one BEV. Besides using the batteries better, hybrid are also more affordable and don't require charging infrastructure. It's a good match for a large part of the world's population in the coming decade. This is a fundamental reason for Toyota diverse approach. We want to reduce carbon emission as much as possible and as soon as possible. This figure shows a variety of variety of energy sources of different powered vehicles. Nowadays, thanks to innovation for alternative liquid fuel, carbon neutral fuel such as biofuel and e-fuel will potentially be implemented to the vehicles. Plug-in hybrid and hybrid vehicles practically solution for the utilizing carbon neutral fuels because they don't require much fuel thanks to high efficiency. Carbon neutral fuel can also help reduce emission from the existing petroleum powered vehicles in the market. To summarize this presentation to 3 key points. Firstly, number one, let's not forget our common enemy is carbon. Second, there is more than one way to fight our enemy, carbon. Finally, when we provide diverse and affordable low-emission vehicles, more customers can reduce their carbon emissions. Finally, in order to realize sustainable mobility society, different aspects are necessary, such as government support, charging infrastructure, customer awareness, and innovation from academia. Let us create together. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Well, that was a very concise and insightful presentations. So now I would like to invite speakers to be the floor.
Thank you.
Hello. I had a question for Dr. Shadrina. It was more about, you talk about so Central Asia, and if I don't mistaken, know that Kazakhstan, for example, have a lot of nuclear resource. You didn't talk about those used into the renewable. What do you think about that?
Can you give your name and affiliation?
Dr. Shadrina.
Oh.
Does it work? Okay, yeah. Yeah, that's true. Kazakhstan, I think, number 2 in the world by their deposits of nuclear, and they are actually exporting a lot. As I said, I skipped totally any context of the Central Asian countries, and when I do research on energy transition, I actually focus only on those new sources, relatively new for the Central Asia, such as wind and solar. And I don't look at hydropower because I said, for instance, I don't consider it sustainable because of glacier melting, and that's already kind of making the case very complicated. And nuclear too, by choice, the research design is such that I also don't include it in my analysis, although early on I did some work on nuclear in Kazakhstan, because now they are actually considering adopting their energy source. They are planning, there is a public discussion whether they would build or not, but yes, research design is such that it's out of scope.
Thank you. And
thank you very much. All very interesting presentations. My name is Tanya Fredericks. I worked for the European Commission at the Director General Research and Innovation. I am now an active senior, being retired. And I have one question on the role of research and innovation in all these objectives. I think they're relevant for everybody, but I would like to ask them specifically to Mr. Copenhall and also to Fua from Toyota, because many of the objectives, many of the transitions will not be achieved without increased investment in research and innovation to achieve either the underlying vectors as renewable energy, or, for example, what you mentioned, the huge investments coming up on carbon capture storage. So both the same question, how much is the industry willing to invest and take the share of the research and innovation that has to be done?
It's a very good question, because actually it's also an issue of timing. We are at this stage with the deadlines of 2050 by which we need to be carbon neutral or net zero. Now, in this industry like ours, we have long investment cycles, which is 30 years. So basically, we are now at the stage of deploying the technologies we have. And that's our main focus for investments, is deployment of the existing technologies. Now, these technologies come, indeed, as you say, mainly from research. So we are also part of what is called SPIRE, which is a process industry group of several process industries, which is looking at what research is needed going forward. I think what we, and I'm sorry to be a little bit critical, not fully, but I think what we face is that sometimes the research, and I hope I'm not too technical when I'm saying that research is focusing on the lower TRL levels, but actually needs to go to TRL 8 and 9 for us to be very useful, means pilot phase, demonstration phase. Sometimes that research stops at the earlier TRL levels, and we, especially from funding perspective, European funding perspective, is that we don't see that consistency between the different TRL levels. So that either research stops because there is no funding available to go to the pilot or demonstrator, or we and that's another remark that Draghi makes in his report, some companies then say, we take out the research out of Europe and we do the 8 and 9 outside of Europe. That can't be the intention of research. What we would like to see, and what we are focusing on now, is that we look at consistency between what we find in our demonstrators and how can we refine some of these findings through research. How can we improve our carbon capture technologies? We're looking at several types of uses that we have. What can we do? What can we do to improve the use of CO2 in aviation fuels, for instance, or in chemicals? That's research, but it comes from the demonstrator. So that continuous interaction between the higher and the lower TRL levels is for us key in investing in research.
May I? Yes, thank you for your questions. Toyota have many sites in the global, but now automotive sector is a transition period. So not only carbon neutral, also we need to consider digital technology in the car. Also how to connect the society. That kind of technology we can imply as much as possible, as soon as possible. So now we collaborate globally with academias, even in Europe. So also, as my corporation mentioned, now we are very focusing the EU funding project. Already we have around 20 projects. Then this year, 2024, we started newly 5 projects. So I very expected how to collaborate, how to enhance the research. That's my opinion. Thank you very much.
If I may just add to what Mr. Fua said, Toyota is one of the most active Japanese companies based in Europe in the framework programs, Horizon Europe and the previous ones. And also because you are based in Europe, you can actually have some funding from Europe. So that was just a little pitch.
Maybe a follow-up question I want to ask to Estelle. As we heard from the industry representatives, that there's an important role of collaboration within a cluster and also within a whole ecosystem that also includes public players. From your research on the Belgian situation, is there any policy conclusion that you would draw? Also comparing the Belgian experience to the French or the German one, what would be good measures to improve the efficiency of the clusters in improving the green transition?
So I think I have the answer like maybe in 6 months' time. But what I can say is that the regional industrial policies, the industrial policies that I've put in place here in Belgium are really inspired by this work on the competitiveness of regions by Michael Potters and others. Huh? And so all of them in all 3 regions, they're based on collaborations between universities and companies, and so there's funding from the regions for the corporations, so like staff to organize different activities, plus money and subsidies for research, so directed for research or so. In principle, they think that this is effective, and so I guess what our research will be able to show is to what extent this is really happening at the cluster level versus at the firm level, and at least say, I think I'd be able to say whether it's 20% firm level capabilities versus 80 or 36, whatever. I don't know the number, but I'll be able to say what's driven by the ecosystem, and so which is a place where regional policies will be impactful versus unique firm level capabilities, but in 6 months' time only. Or, hopefully.
So we will have the 7th conference in 6 months that she can have the answer to you.
Sorry, my question is quite short and maybe directed to Mr. Copenhall about the because you mentioned the current carbon price levels don't allow for business case for all the investments. At the same time, you're also discussing the need for support for R&D that takes it a bit further down the line. So at what level do you need the carbon price to be to, I'm sure you play around with these numbers, so I just want to I get a sense of where should we be headed for such things to not require so much support, knowing that there's fiscal space issues, et cetera, et cetera. So.
Yeah, don't pin me down on the figure, and I hope it's not in the newspaper tomorrow. But actually, if you're talking about a carbon capture installation, and I'm not talking about the infrastructure, because that may be financed through other ways. But a normal carbon capture installation would be around 180 to 200 euros per ton, more or less. And again, when I'm talking about the 200 and 500 million euros investment per plant, some of my members told me that's 1 year ago. With the inflation, it has gone up dramatically. So, that's why I'm saying don't pin me down on it, because there are so many factors that can influence that cost, but that's more or less the order of magnitude. Basically, it's telling you that with the current ETS price, we don't have a business case.
Gemma from Waseda University. I have a question to Professor Matsumoto. Regarding the policy implication for your studies, I understand the importance of household sector, and then their behaviors are different by income group. And then what causes that difference in responses? That has some clue to the, I think, potential policy implications. Thank you.
Thanks for the questions. It's working? Oh, okay. Indeed, it's, the difference across different income household doesn't make so much difference. And indeed, if you control the household size, of course, the household living in a big house consume more energy. But my point is that the age of the household and the size of the household, location of the household, that makes huge difference. And what I want to stress is that it is really important to understand each other's. It's very difficult to imagine what kind of life in the other persons, for instance, Northern European people, what kind of lifestyle Spanish people have, or the opposite is also true. And also, probably in the policy implication, somebody already said, probably it's very important to encourage senior single person to move to the facilities. It's really important in terms of energy consumption in the household. Thanks for the question.
I have one question to Dr. Yonezawa. So your finding is very interesting that high-income households more suffer. But is this unique to Norway, or if you look at the U.S. household or some rich European country?
So this result is actually not uncommon for the at least developed countries. Especially like the countries, not country, but actually like British Columbia. That's one paper I wrote, or actually two papers I wrote about. One actually thing is like the same as Norway, the electricity is basically based on the hydro. So the common pricing doesn't increase the electricity price. That's why like that expenditure side effect becomes a bit smaller for the case of Norway, and that I didn't have time, so I didn't say, but and that's true also for the British Columbia. Then that's one reason, and actually there are many papers also about the US, and then the expenditure side effect becomes a bit stronger, but generally the simulation model suggests that the income side effects probably dominates, but well, anyway, that's the simulation results, and yes.
Well, thank you very much. I think with that, I would like to close this session. So please join me to give a big hand to all the speakers. Thank you very much.